there's wisdom from our learned experience of it did not go well last time. It is really costly. And can I bear those costs right now? So the purely just speak up, to me, simplifies the challenge far too much.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the All Inclusive podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Elaine Lin Hering, an accomplished facilitator, keynote speaker, and author of the book Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Lead with Courage. Elaine is renowned for her expertise in enhancing skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict resolution. In the episode, we explore the unseen barriers to speaking up in the workplace and the profound impact of silence on DEI efforts. Elaine shares her unique insights on how personal backgrounds shape our relationship with silence and the critical role of social capital in elevating marginalized voices. As always, before jumping into the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and follow on your favourite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. That being said, let's jump in. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I am delighted to be in conversation with you.
Yes, me too. So let's kick things off. Tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and a little bit of a quick rundown of your upcoming book, which is
Mhm.
Unlearning Silence.
Yeah, well, I am a recovering lawyer, as it seems like so many of us are, and almost an accidental author. I always vowed that I wouldn't write anything unless I had something to say. And so when I stumbled across the idea of unlearning silence, I thought, I think there's something to say here. And the reason I went down this path is because I, like everyone else, received the advice and gave it out of just speak up, right? You're not getting heard, you're not getting promoted, your ideas aren't changing the world around you. What you need to do is speak up louder, more directly, more clearly. And it felt like there was a missing piece. And I thought, the challenge isn't just that I'm not speaking up because I feel like I am, but if I'm not, what silence have I learned? And in what ways do the people around me and the systems I'm a part of continue to silence me and so many voices like me? And having spent more than a decade in leadership development, I've also been part of far too many diagnostic calls where leaders say, I want to be inclusive. I really care about my people. And then you talk with their direct reports, their team members, and their team members have a very different opinion of their leaders. And
Yeah.
it feels like this really frustrating gap where leaders are so well intentioned, but their good intentions aren't translating to impact. And team members don't feel supported. And so we lean out of our jobs and our workplaces at the very time that we need those novel ideas, those different perspectives to solve the world's gnarliest problems. So our learning silence is, how do we figure out how to actually bring forth not just the loudest voices, but for each of us to be able to move through the world as we intend?
Fascinating, amazing. So, what kept you motivated? Because I've spoken to a number of authors just doing the podcast, and I know that it starts off great, and you're like, yes,
Oh,
I'm
oh,
writing, things are going well, but then all of a sudden it
yes.
kind of starts to plateau a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear kind of what kept you motivated in it continuing to explore those complexities between like
Hmm.
professional as well as like as a personal individual
Hmm.
being silenced and your experiences with that.
Yeah, and you're spot on that for me, this content, this idea really is both professional and personal because there's having taught at the Harvard Negotiation Project and taught those frameworks and thinking these frameworks around negotiating, difficult conversations, giving and receiving feedback, they're sound. And people pay a lot of money to receive this training, but some people still don't negotiate, have the difficult conversations, or give and receive feedback. What gives? What is up with that? and really wanting to crack that code. And then for me personally, as the youngest daughter of a family from Taiwan, and as someone raised in the Christian church, told to turn the other cheek, right? Don't lash out. I learned a ton of silence and was told many, many times, just speak up. And yet that advice wasn't satisfying. So I think what kept me going is I realized I'm not the only one. And and so often the thing about silence is it becomes framed as a problem about you, right? Leaders say, if you would just go take that assertiveness training, if you would just communicate more clearly, then we could promote you. And a lot of us are thinking, oh, I'm pretty sure that's not it, but we don't have language for it, versus actually the behaviors you're exhibiting continue to diminish me, continue to silence me in the workplace. And really wanting that to change because I have seen far too many people who are wickedly talented, incredibly talented, become a shell of themselves, tiptoeing around, doubting themselves. And it's framed as imposter syndrome when I think it's really the systems weren't designed for us. And we're answering the wrong question. So, wanting that healing and that wholeness to actually answer the right question, which is what role does silence play in our teams, in our workplaces, in our communities, in our families? And how do we together solve for silence rather than pointing the finger and say, go fix yourself?
So, whilst we're talking about it not only being something within ourselves that we need to work on, it may well also, and it definitely does, need to be those around us may need to make
Mm-hmm.
some changes too. I want to we'll go back on to kind of everyone else. I want to
Yeah.
just touch on in terms of personally for ourselves. I know a lot of people find it challenging to speak up,
Mm-hmm.
and you've touched on kind of assertiveness training. Um,
Mm-hmm.
why do you think that is? Like I mean, I know
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and I resonate with yourself and your upbringing. I'm from a Caribbean background,
Mm.
and I also was raised in the Catholic Church with my mum, and
Yeah.
so I totally get that that
Yeah.
sometimes you do that you couldn't really say exactly what you wanted to say when you wanted to say it, or you needed to
Mm-hmm.
say it in a certain type of way. It was very difficult navigating those waters.
Yeah.
So I appreciate sometimes the cultural aspect does play a part in that, but I would love to hear from you other areas why you feel
Mm-hmm.
people just don't speak up.
I think that the culture is a lot of it, right? Because the silence, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it is our families of origin, there's a deference and a respect, right? Respect your elders. Children are supposed to be seen and not heard. Those messages were repeated over and over. And then you think about school, and the people who take us off subject are the ones who follow their curiosity. And I have huge empathy for educators because our school systems are not set up for teachers to succeed or students to succeed. But if you are out of line, quote unquote, at school, you get slapped on the wrist, literally or figuratively. And so we learn that to behave well means to stay silent. To keep the peace means to stay silent. If when I offer a different perspective, I have to deal with the backlash, your defensiveness, retaliation, legally speaking, or just that feeling of retaliation, silence actually feels like the smarter choice. Often silence is survival. Right? To keep my place at the table, I've got to quote unquote get in line. I have to do things the way they are done around here. And all of those are messages that we can internalize over time of what it means to be professional, of what it means to be part of this family, of what it might mean to be accepted, even though our acceptance is really tenuous in that system, anyways. And realizing that a lot of that learning is subconscious, is unconscious over time. So, as adults, I think for us, the question is how do we actually want to move through the world? The book is titled Unlearning Silence because it's not just about learning more skills to be more assertive, but really excavating and wrestling with what silence have I learned? of the assumptions and norms that I hold or think are true about when I can speak, about when it's too costly for me to speak. Because even in the workplace, if my boss reminds me of that uncle of mine, and apparently it's always the uncle, then my boss can say, speak up, I'm here, my door is always open. And my body is telling me it's not safe because of my lived experience to deny that without wrestling with and looking at what of this is still true, what of this was when I was 16, what of this is me now, what of this is this new environment. And also, there's wisdom from our learned experience of it did not go well last time. It is really costly. And can I bear those costs right now? So, the purely just speak up to me simplifies the challenge far too much. And so it's really in that wrestling with what do you want to keep from what you've learned over time and what might you shed and what might you experiment with today so we move forward with intentionality.
And I feel an element of that is having the courage to not only
Mm,
look back, but then
mm,
look to the future and look forward. And
mhm,
as you said, kind of what do you want to do? How do
mhm,
you want to move forward?
mhm.
I think that I know for myself is something that I am finding more and more in myself that I'm actually confident enough. I feel like I can do it, but
Yeah.
um that it does sometimes creep. The silence does
To-
kind of creep in, definitely.
Totally. It's so deep. And the first step is awareness.
Mm,
There's this thing that we've learned called silence, and it manifests in different ways for different people. And particularly because there's no way really of separating us from the people we live with or that we work with, right? We're so intertwined that for some, and often it is white cis men who are like, oh, I've never struggled with being silenced. Well, yeah, that's because your voice has always been welcome. And so, one of the ways that you end up silencing the people you lead is by fundamentally underestimating how hard it is for other people because you did not grow up with a Caribbean background or a Taiwanese background. And you were always welcomed. So to have that same expectation of, oh, if you have an issue, of course you would just say something to me. There's more work for us all to do together.
mm. So in talking about 'cause leaders, sometimes they do unintentionally make
Hmm.
people feel like they are being silenced.
Hmm.
Um, what ways or what advice would you give to leaders in ensuring that they don't do that, ensuring that they are giving space for
Yeah.
other voices to be heard?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say two things. One is what can you do to change the calculus? So you mentioned courage, and it does take courage to use your voice to speak up, to bring more of yourself into the work environment or the team. And a lot of it is internal calculation. Right. The last time that this happened, it did not go well. I was let go from my job. I can't afford to be let go from my job right now. Therefore, I'm not going to say anything. And how much of that is, under deep-rooted fear or subconscious? But that is a calculation that happens very quickly. So for leaders, I would say, how do you change the calculus? There is communicating your intent of wanting to build an inclusive environment. What does that mean? That means wanting to hear what people have to say and your reaction in the moment, being able to listen, appreciate, acknowledge rather than defend. All of that can actually change the calculation for other people to say, oh, Natasha as my manager is different than the last manager I had. The other is um, what communication mediums or modes do we use? Corporate America, at least, tends to prioritize people who speak in three succinct bullet points, no ums. And for those of us who tend to be more rambly, or
Me.
communicate better, okay, by typing rather than talking, you're inherently at a disadvantage because that's not where the conversations are happening. So, as a leader, do you know what the natural strength of your team members is from a communication standpoint? This implicates neurodiversity. This implicates processing. But if we're only having those essential conversations, and you can only be an executive if your strength is real time verbal communication, we're missing out on so much talent. Can we design our communication medium so that whether it is asynchronous communication, whether it is Slack, email, etc., that folks who are wired differently can also have their thoughts represented and heard? And we're not elevating a certain type of wiring over another type of wiring.
Mm.
The other is making it really clear how to actually get in touch with me. Part of the complexity is there's so many mediums. Am I supposed to call you? Am I supposed to text? Am I supposed to wait for a next one-on-one? Oh, you keep canceling our one-on-one. Is it clear that if there's an issue, text is the best way to reach me, or email me? And don't be afraid to nudge me if I don't reply in 3 days, because I want to hear what you have to say. And I'm notoriously bad at dropping the ball. And all of those things, making clear what the avenue is so that the labor of figuring out where, when, how do I actually say this doesn't just sit on the person who may already experience a challenge in speaking up.
In thinking about what you've just said, it does make total sense. I can imagine, and I know from past experience in starting that new job, you meet your
Mm-hmm.
manager, and say if something's going wrong or say something's not sitting right, like how do you
Yeah.
get in touch with them? You don't want to say the wrong thing, you're not sure, and what do you do? And yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree, and I can see that actually as a leader, you making it communicating clearly to your team members, like, this is
Mm-hmm.
the best way for you to reach me. These are the
Mm-hmm.
times in which I am available, or where we're
Mm-hmm.
setting the boundaries, setting it clear to
Mm-hmm.
everybody. Not just, and I think that goes, I feel like doing that is the action, because I feel like
Mm.
there's a lot of leaders that just say, "Oh no, I'm approachable. Come to me anytime." Which
Totally.
that's that. I mean, like, that's great. That's what we want to hear. But like, you do need to. So how do I actually do that though? Like, if it's
Mm-hmm.
like you said, do you want me to send you an email? Should I call
Yes.
you? Like,
Yes.
what are your working hours? So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally understand
Yeah.
that.
And the other dynamic at play is if we're not actively designing how we communicate, we default to the communication preferences that serve the people in power.
Hmm.
So if you think about it, so many of us are working in global environments. Everybody goes to headquarters. The board meetings are held in the primary time zone where the executive team sits. I'm not saying that that is bad. There's a reality to not being able to find a perfect time zone because we've all looked for it. But how do we optimize for voice? How do we be intellectually honest that if you're asking someone to join the board meeting at 4 a.m. their time, or 12:30 right after midnight their time, it is impossible as a human being to be firing on all cylinders or at your best. So are there other ways we can design the communication, whether it's synchronous, whether in typing, whether in figuring it out and making it discussable. So it's also the leader saying, here's what I would prefer. Here's a clear avenue for getting through to me. Also, what makes it easiest for you to share your thoughts? Because if that's actually easiest for you to type, great. I may, as a leader, be able to flex and understand that what I really want is your best thought, your best work, not ease of communication for me. It depends on the number of people on your team and what you can do, but for even that to be discussable starts to hedge against just defaulting to whoever's already in power.
Mm. And I know many talk about social capital, right? And
Mm.
using your connections that you've got to
Mhm.
help you along the way. Um, what are your thoughts? In what ways can individuals actually use their
Yeah.
social connections, social capital to create more inclusive supporting environments so that others don't
Mhm.
feel, or so that others feel that they can actually use their voices in the best way?
Totally. Let's actually back up, zoom out one step, which is to say, what does it cost you really to use some of your social capital to promote someone else's ideas? One fundamental difference is whether you're operating from a scarcity mindset that says, if I elevate Natasha, I implicitly will be diminishing myself because it's a zero sum game? Or are you operating from an abundance mindset that says we can all succeed? And elevating Natasha doesn't diminish me, it might even elevate me. If we're operating, and I would challenge all of us to operate from that abundance mindset, if we're operating from that abundance mindset, then my lending my social capital looks like, hey, I'm inviting Jing, who's more junior, right? Maybe English second language, new to this set of stakeholders. I'm inviting Jing to present today because they're closest to the data, or because I've never met someone so thoughtful about the issue. You're positioning them so other people say, well, Elaine thinks highly of them. I better listen up to them too. You could call this sponsorship, you could call this mentorship, you could call this allyship, but fundamentally it's saying, how do I create opportunities for other people and embed my endorsement so that they get heard, right? And fundamentally, what you're also doing is changing the norms of who gets to be heard, what voices are acceptable, that they don't have to fit into the box and the mold, that there's one version of what we're supposed to look and sound like in the workplace or in the world.
I mean, the abundance mindset is a
Mm-hmm.
mindset in which I truly and wholeheartedly hope that that is the majority.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't feel like it is. I hear time and time again stories from friends, colleagues
Mm-hmm.
of their leaders being like coming from the diminished mindset, as you've just
Yeah.
explained.
Yep.
Um, so knowing that that is a mindset that a lot of us are experiencing in the workplace against leaders,
Mm-hmm.
um, what advice would you give to those
Mm-hmm.
that are kind of in that working environment?
Love that question because this actually takes us back to what is voice. If silence is having to edit out parts of yourself, not just what you say, but how you show up, then voice is not just the words that you say in a meeting, but also how you move through the world. So your voice is, despite the dominant paradigms in the world around us, which is shaped by patriarchy, which is shaped by capitalism, if I have one life to live, how do I want to live it? And let that be true in your sphere of influence. Because my experience and observation, again, professional and personal, is there are people moving through the world with this abundance mindset who are willing to make the connections, who believe that good things go out and have a ripple effect. And of course, Ruchika Tulshan is writing on this with her upcoming book, Uncompete. Right? How do we think about competition differently to be in that abundance mindset? Because the scarcity has gotten us locked, butting heads with each other in our own silos, competing with each other because our, organizational P&L needs to look better than yours to be rewarded. And where has that gotten us, really?
Mm,
And if we're not satisfied with that, how do we change that? And I always start with it starts with us. Where do you want to put your energy? How do you want to live? And then what norms and paradigms might you want to put energy towards shifting because
yeah,
you believe it's worth it?
yeah, totally. Oh, Elaine, I've so much enjoyed our conversation. I'm literally, I think everything that you said, your insights and experiences that you shared today, thank you so much. For everyone listening, do make sure that you pick up Elaine's book, Unlearning Silence. It's truly a magnificent read. So Elaine, just before you leave us, what would you like our listeners to take away from today regarding your book, Unlearning Silence?
I hope that we see the opportunity to change things going forward. That what has happened in the past can be a data point, but it doesn't have to be definitive of how we move forward. And the opportunity of unlearning silence is an ongoing one, right? I titled the book Unlearning Silence ING because it's not a once and done process. So, really interrogating, in what ways have I learned silence? In what ways have I benefited from staying silent? Is that how I want to live? And as a leader or someone who exists alongside people, in what ways might I be silencing other people and diminishing them when I don't intend to? So, the opportunity of unlearning silence really is closing that gap between how we see ourselves, how we aspire to lead, and how we're actually leading. So, I hope listeners join us on that journey.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I will be putting links down below for everyone who is listening so they can grab a copy of your book and stay up to date with everything that you're doing. Once again, Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Natasha, for having me.